another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Whether she's writing about the lavish Manhattan parties of beautiful, fallen, powerful angels known as Blue Bloods, or is in the mind of a young blackjack dealer in post-apocalyptic New Vegas, Melissa de la Cruz tackles questions of family, lineage, and inheritance in her best-selling young adult fiction without kipping on magic, dystopia, and myth. The Los Angeles Times has written of the best-selling author's vast library of works, which Deadline.com has highlighted as including her work in the YA and fantasy spaces, where de la Cruz is also responsible for novel series like The Au Pairs, over the self-titled debut, Skinny Dipping, Sun-Kissed and Crazy Hot, and the Beauchamp family throughout Witches of East End, Serpent's Kiss, Winds of Salem, Triple Moon, and Double Eclipse, adapted into the hit Lifetime series Witches of East End. She's also known for her middle grade series, The Descendants, throughout the Isle of the Lost, Return to the Isle of the Lost, Rise of the Isle of the Lost, Escape from the Isle of the Lost, and Beyond the Isle of the Lost, inspired by the same-named Disney Channel series, as well as the historical romance series starring Alex and Eliza, based on the love story of Alexander Hamilton and Eliza Schuyler. The Hollywood Reporter has shed further spotlight on her banner successes within the New York Times best-selling Blue Bloods series, throughout Blue Bloods, Masquerade, Revelations, The Van Allen Legacy, Bloody Valentine, Lost in Time, Gates of Paradise, Afterlife and After Death, The Ring and the Crown, its sequel to Lily and the Cross, and romantic comedy 29 Dates, its sequel 29 Boyfriends, and has partnered with Disney Publishing worldwide to launch a new studio intended to create and develop stories across the entire Disney company. Melissa de la Cruz Studio will work with the new and established authors to create original content for development across multiple platforms and expands on the author's existing relationship with Disney. Melissa is also celebrated around the world for other hits including duologies like Never After, throughout The 13th Fairy and The Stolen Slippers, and then the Queen's Assassin series over the self-titled debut in The Queen's Secret Heart, the Heart of the Dread trilogy over Frozen, Stolen and Golden, and countless standalone hits like How to Become Famous in 2 Weeks or Less, The Fashionista Files, Adventures in 4-Inch Heels and Faux Pas, Fresh Off the Boat, Angels of Sunset Boulevard, Girl Stays in the Picture, Surviving High School, Something in Between, Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe, Someone to Love, Once Upon a River, Gotham High, High School Musical, The Road Trip, Cinder and Glass, Snow and Poison, Going Dark, and her more recent successes like The 5 Stages of Courting Dallas Ramos, When Stars Align and Rings of Fate, and her Octagon Valley series with Super Secret Mission at the Center of the Moon Pie. And she joins us today to talk about it all. Melissa, welcome to the show. Now, we understand versus becoming an astronaut or a princess or president, you actually dreamed of becoming an author since you were 11 years old?
I think because I was a shy kid and I was scared of people, I really loved books and I just really loved reading. I just remember being able to read. Once I was able to read on my own, I was just reading. And I remember loving Dr. Seuss, loving these big fairy tale books that my mom would buy me. I think it was like Treasury of Fairy Tales. And so I just really, I don't know, I just really enjoyed escaping from real life. I think is why I liked reading. And then once I realized that, after I started to read, I wanted to write my own books. I presented my mom with a book when I was 8 years old, a book of poetry. And so I'd always just liked it. I liked reading and I liked writing. I liked making things. I liked making things up. And I think I'm just really lucky because I've always known what I wanted to do with my life. Some people don't know for a long time, and I think it is a gift, to know so young. I don't really like to do anything else, and I'm not really good at anything else.
Now, Columbia University's alumni magazine, years after you attended there studying art history and English, profile your staggering success in a cover story, where on the first Saturday in June, thousands of fans have crowded into New York City's Javits Center, lining up since early morning for the chance to meet their heroes at BookCon. The 2-day celebration of books and pop culture brings together authors and readers of young adult literature, a booming market called YA that's made rock stars out of writers. One of the industry's brightest lights is Melissa de la Cruz, a 1993 graduate. Perched at a table as the line for her book signing snaked around stanchions and out of view. Excited fans rolled through to take selfies and meet de la Cruz. Rock star status confirmed. To say the author's prolific would be an understatement. In the 20 years since she published her first novel, she's written more than 50 books, penned 3 television movies, helped develop 2 thriving book festivals on opposite coasts, and cumulatively her books have spent years on the New York Times bestseller list. Traveling back in time before all that success, who do you spotlight as any academics from your time at Columbia or before who were early fans of your talent and might have even played a part in helping its development along?
My high school English teachers were amazing. I mean, Mr. Warren, my sophomore high school teacher, just a very intellectual guy who went to Brown. And just, he told me I was going to be a writer after I turned in one of my essays. And I think I also did like a short story. And he said, "You're going to be a writer." And I said, "Oh my goodness. All right." And I was like, well, I kind of want that. And to kind of hear it validated was really great. Kenneth Koch, who was a famous poet and a professor at Columbia, Wallace Stevens at Columbia. I mean, it was just amazing to have this education, in literature. So yeah, for sure. I would say, some editors, Jeff Klosky, who is now the head of Riverhead Books. He was a young editor back then at Simon Schuster. He was the first one who kind of took interest in my career and kind of helped me on my way. Simon and Schuster bought my first novel. So, yeah.
Well, look at it as a testament to your will and determination. You spent 10 years in New York writing for Marie Claire and Allure, among other publications, before selling your first book in 1999, Cat's Meow. Any memories stand out for you that encapsulate that first works publication?
My first novel was called Cat's Meow, and it's kind of this satirical, kind of absolutely fabulous meets Sex and the City story about a girl in New York City who's turning 25 for the fifth time, and I wrote it when I was 29. Uh, and it was just really fun. It's got my sense of humor. It's kind of a love letter to New York and kind of the kooky characters that populate New York in the 90s. So yeah, I think that's probably my favorite standalone.
The Village Voice, it's safe to say, was an early fan of your Au Pair series, offering it up to readers as a gift bag of satire, spectacle, and name dropping. It's all too fabulous for words. Throughout the self-titled debut and hit sequels, Skinny Dipping, Sunkiss, and Crazy Hot. Was this based on any nannying gigs you yourself experienced in the Hamptons, or conversely had in the way of mischievous babysitters you based this first series around?
We had a rental on Shelter Island for several years. So, and it was really cool. Like we were very young, we were in our 20s, and our friends were bartenders, and one of them was a fisherman who only worked, 3 months out of the year. And once he was done with, the fishing season, that was his money for the year. And everybody was kind of young and partied and had a lot of fun. They were bartenders and ski instructors. And it was interesting because, my husband and I were from Columbia University, and we were kind of these like overachiever kind of types, kind of like my husband was an architect back then. And to meet people who had a lot of fun, but were not, kind of, I would say, career ambitious was really eye-opening. And I wanted to write about that and how fun, a life like that is. And the au pairs, I guess, maybe came out from being in the Hamptons and, some terrible babysitting jobs I had.
Let's introduce viewers next to a trio that's been described as pretty and petty, all named Ashley, who ruled the 7th grade at Miss Gamble's exclusive private school in San Francisco. Smart Lauren Page has been a target of their bullying since kindergarten, but now that her dad struck it rich, she's scored a major makeover and launched a mission. First, she was going to join the Ashleys, and then she was going to destroy them. Publishers Weekly revealed of her plans. What did you find you had the most fun with, overplaying her plots out, or where there's a new name in school? Jealous, you know you are. Birthday Vicious and Lip Gloss Jungle.
And the Ashleys was definitely set at the all-girls school that I went to. I went to Convent of the Sacred Heart in San Francisco, a school that educated Diane Feinstein and, the Aliotos, kind of the elite of San Francisco. So it was kind of a school of debutantes. And yeah, I hated it when I went there, but looking back, I have a lot more fondness and affection for it. I had a great education from it. Definitely felt very special, very nurtured. And so it was fun to kind of write it and kind of exercise those demons a little bit. I did.
Now, within the world of Blue Bloods, you'd unleash what it's safe to call your first bona fide sensation as an author, which Entertainment Weekly helped introduce. Do so via Skylar Van Allen, a misfit at a prestigious New York City private school who begins craving raw meat and seeing blue veins on her arms when she turns 15. Soon she becomes enthralled in mysterious happenings, like a popular boy suddenly becoming interested in her, and the death of a classmate, launching with the self-titled debut Blue Bloods, before it quickly exploded into what Deadline.com within a few hits later described as the universe of Blue Bloods, where New York City secretly ruled by an elite class of immortal vampires. But when one of their own disappears, they're faced with an existential threat. An ancient and evil breed of vampires return. Amid this chaos, 17-year-old Skye, the first half-human vampire, faces her own challenges as a newcomer to the prestigious Duchesne Institute. Previously exiled from the Blue Bloods, she must now find her place in this society, and as she does, begins to uncover a rising evil that'll threaten the very existence of the Coven. The question is, will she be the savior of vampire society or its doom? When you look back across early hits like Masquerade, Revelations, The Van Allen Legacy, Bloody Valentine, Lost in Time, and Gates of Paradise, what elements of this world, from the characters to the storylines or the supernatural powers and beyond, do you feel made it connect with you creatively and by extension readers who kept coming back for more?
Blue Bloods is about a bunch of teenagers in New York City who discover they are reincarnations of vampires who've lived thousands of years and first came to the United States on the Mayflower. So I thought that was kind of funny and kind of cute. The rich are bloodsuckers. And so that was the inspiration for the book. What if all the rich and powerful and connected people in the United States were actually vampires? And this actually came from research that I had done where all these famous people, politicians, and even celebrities could trace their ancestry to the Mayflower, not just the Bushes and the Roosevelts, but people like Oprah Winfrey. I remember I was like, oh my God, Oprah could trace her ancestry to the Mayflower. That's crazy. So that kind of was where the inspiration came from. What if all these people who are so powerful in our country were actually vampires? One of my favorite characters in Blue Bloods is Jack Force, who is, also the angel of destruction, because he has a twin. One is the angel of death and one is the angel of destruction. But, he's somebody who was who sided with Lucifer. So the vampires are also fallen angels, and who is trying to prove that he's actually a good guy. So I really like that. My favorite Blue Bloods book is Masquerade because it's set in Venice. And also I was pregnant when I was writing it. So I remember writing it and then falling asleep and, kind of writing and napping. And, so it was and it was the only book that came from the outline kind of perfectly. So I write my outlines and then I write about 100 pages and then I see whether the book is, kind of matching up to my expectations. So usually what happens is I rewrite the outline after 100 pages or, I have to do some kind of surgical editing. But Masquerade, I wrote that outline and I wrote that draft and it was actually just came out perfectly. I don't know if the universe was looking out for me because I was pregnant, but I just remember, it was easy to write. It was set in Venice and it was just really fun. It also opened up the series in a huge way where we weren't just in New York. We weren't just dealing, with kids, kind of in a Gossip Girl setting. It kind of became this bigger series and bigger imagination in my mind.
It seems like spin-offs like the Beauchamp family series are always welcomed by fans, as this clan was amid the Los Angeles Times report at the time that literature for young adults has become such an it genre that increasing numbers of big-name authors are trading on their reps to write for younger audiences. Not Melissa de la Cruz. Having won legions of fans with her best-selling YA series Blue Bloods, she's heading in the opposite direction with Witches of East End, the first installment in a new series for grown-ups. This one is definitely not for kids. Where were you taken to seek readers next throughout Witches of East End, Serpent's Kiss, Winds of Salem, Triple Moon, and Double Eclipse, in the way of all the new possibilities that come rushing in when you expand a world like this? And to such entertaining results that Lifetime wound up producing a hit TV show out of it in the process.
Witches of East End, I loved the first book. The first book was the hardest to write, but also, you know, kind of the most satisfying when I figured out the twist. I remember, I still distinctly remember it. I was kind of like almost done with the book, but it just wasn't working. And I couldn't figure out why it wasn't working. And my husband and I were into Hamptons, which is where Witches of East End is set, you know, East End being, you know, kind of East Hampton, and we were at the Ram's Head Inn. We were actually in Shelter Island. And I remember like when I figured out the twist, I was like scribbling on a napkin. And I was like, oh, I know. You know, I got the characters mixed up. I think this has to be this character and this has to be that character. And then that solves it. And I was really excited. So I still remember that. And I also remember how hard it was. So I'm glad that book is behind me. It's really exciting. It's so much fun. And I had big, big dreams for the series. You know, we have, if you count all the spin-offs for Blue Bloods, I think we ended up publishing about 19. Actually, now I think we've published 21 books in that universe. Uh, so even in book two, I was like, oh, this could be something really big and I want to keep going. But, you know, Disney would buy them two at a time. So they're like, that's great, Mel, you know, but we're going to buy them two at a time. So, you know, you're always kind of writing them, hoping you get to write more and giving readers, you know, a satisfying read in each book, but also hoping that you can continue the story for sure. The Beauchamp family became the Witches of East End series on Lifetime. And they were also, you know, slightly in the Blue Bloods universe, which was kind of hard legally when we sold the rights to the TV show. We had to say, you know, you can't have Blue Bloods with witches. So it is in Witches of East End, they are actually also Norse gods. And there's Norse mythology in it because that was something I was really obsessed with as a child. And it's about two sisters who are very different. It's, you know, in a way, it's inspired by the emotions of having I'm very close to my sister and very, very different, but we're not the people in the book, but definitely the feelings of that, you know, of having a sister. And then the mom is very formidable. So, you know, a little bit inspired by the emotions of my mom, but not, you know, a character study of my mom. I would say all the emotions are real and based on, you know, my real lived experience, but the characters are their own people and they're not based on anybody in my family. I think that it's more fun in a way. It's like the magic is different. You know, with the vampires, it's, you know, that whole kind of blood-sucking part of it is very sexy, and witches is more kind of like fun with the spell casting and the Norse myth. You know, getting to play with that mythology was really fun.
What sort of research do you undertake when you're, say, putting yourself through a crash course on Norse mythology?
I was just so obsessed with it as a child. I mean, I remember going to the library when I was 10, 11, you know, and reading all those books. So they were kind of like part of my DNA in a way. So I didn't really have to do that much research because I knew it really well, but I do have a research assistant. So I would, you know, if I said a book somewhere, I believe Lost in Time and Blue Bloods is set in Egypt. So I would ask my research assistant to find people in Egypt to make sure that, you know, I got the settings right. They would read the book. They would kind of prepare a dossier, you know, of documents that I could look at. Like Alex and Eliza, which was based on Alexander Hamilton and Elizabeth Schuyler's romance. You know, I had to do my own research, not just watch Hamilton. I read Elizabeth Schuyler's letters. My research assistant found an American history professor who helped me with the story. So I do stuff like that.
Where do you remember your muse leading you as you expanded the storylines even more broadly into the new Blue Bloods coven throughout Vampires in Manhattan and White Knights?
That series actually got discontinued by Hyperion. So I think I ended it sort of well, but you know, I didn't get the chance to kind of tell the story completely. So that was a little disappointing. But we did do a reboot of Blue Bloods in a new universe. So and that those just came out a couple of years ago.
Proving so popular that you've continued servicing this reading base into its second decade with new Blue Bloods releases like Afterlife and After Death. Recurcus Reviews broke the news that this volume brings the journeys of Skylar and her true love Jack to a close, at least in this parallel universe, while still being accessible to readers new to this world. The authors added a lot of conceptual layers, and those who have followed the series will likely feel satisfied in seeing off these characters. The author once again delivers supernatural melodrama that's both high-spirited and absorbing. Contextual clues point out some ethnic diversity. And it's beyond climactic. Sounds pretty cinematic. Is that how it looked and felt to you as you were writing the series?
There's like kind of an alternate universe of Blue Bloods where Skylar wakes up and she's a different Skylar. And in this universe, she has to kill Lucifer all over again.
Disney lovers and fairy tale fans alike will need to get their hands on this book. The School Library Journal declared after finishing The Isle of the Lost, the first novel in your rendition of the Disney Descendants series, which then continued over Return to the Isle of the Lost, where the American Library Association raved that packed with plenty of humor and adventure, the sequel spin-offs destined to please, with a second movie in the works and a bevy of local readers. And you'd quickly fill that space thereafter with Rise of the Isle of the Lost. Please talk about how you first became a member of Disney's creative world and what you had in store for this series when you first sat down to begin writing from the points of view of King Trident, Mal, Evie, Carlos, and Jay.
I really like that, when, you don't have to be defined by somebody, by your past, you can actually redeem yourselves. And, in a way, that's like my Descendants series for Disney, where the children of Disney's greatest villains, are trying to be good and trying to prove that they're not just the bad kids. Disney, asked me to do it, and I said I'm all in. I'm a Disney kid. I'm a huge Disney fan. And my daughter then was about 7 years old, so we had actually just re-watched all the original Disney animated movies, and so I knew them really well. And not only that, but we were watching the Disney Channel a lot, and I knew that Dove Cameron was gonna star in the movie. So I feel like I was well versed with old Disney and new Disney, and I had a real reverence and a real knowledge of that lore. So I was really excited to be able to add my 2 cents to that universe. And honestly, working with Disney is really fun because they kind of just let you do what you want to do. It was never a problem with plotting or, character. It was always like stuff like, oh, the alligator doesn't talk, in Peter Pan. So you can't actually give him any lines. Also, the mice don't speak English in Cinderella. They're actually chattering in mice, so I would have to change, little things like that, to make sure that it was all through with the franchise. Yeah, no, and again, the idea came from, what if all of Disney's greatest villains, one of the things that I did to bridge the movies to the new TV movies was, instead of, because all the villains die, or they're vanquished in the movies, they fall off cliffs or, they get blown up. So I said, what if instead of, actually, yeah, that did happen, but then they all woke up in the Isle of the Lost, and here they are living their lives, kind of in this island jail. And so they really liked that, and that was really fun. I mean, Maleficent is the best. Sleeping Beauty is my favorite movie, my favorite Disney movie. Maleficent is the best. I mean, she has the best lines. She's a diva. So yeah, and especially how Kristen Chenoweth played her in the TV movie was just, hilarious and awesome. So yeah, Maleficent for the win, for sure. They're all villains, and they're cut off from Auradon, which is the kind of the main kingdom where everybody else lives. So, and there's a dome that separates them, so they can't get past the dome, and they don't have any magic, so they really, are, I guess, declawed, they can't really do any harm. And then basically Ben, who's the son of Beast and Beauty, decides that he wants to forgive the children of the villains because they're innocent and bring them to Auradon. So that's when, kind of all hell breaks loose.
Breakouts are usually fun to read about in books. What thrills did you find with them plotting and then executing Escape from the Isle of the Lost?
We have to create a new adventure with every book that also doesn't take away from the TV movies. So Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to come up with, kind of a full self-contained adventure in each book that, has a bit of the lore and has some magic, but then doesn't, take away from watching the movies or, doesn't I guess contradict anything in the movies. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely like a puzzle. Like, what can I do with this? Um, and but but still make it exciting.
Variety reported amid their coverage of the dolls, clothes, fashion accessories, and Hollywood costumes for the tween and underset that Disney looks to be engaging with fans just beyond the doll playing edge. The premiere of their show boasted 10.5 million viewers in early DVR playback for The Isle of the Lost. What new and exciting directions were you looking to take fans of the series off to and beyond The Isle of the Lost?
Yeah, and there's all new characters in it. I actually miss the old characters. So the new movies feature Red, who's the daughter of the Red Queen, and the daughter of Cinderella, Ella. So it was fun to be able to play with a whole new cast of characters. But I also found I missed the old characters a little bit. So it's an exclusively new cast, but in the Barnes& and Noble special edition, we have a short story featuring the old characters. And uh and there'll be some new stuff coming down the pike. So I don't know if I can talk about it yet.
Preening royalty, a touch of magic, and dramatic betrayal. What's not to love? Teenage Vogue posited on the Ring and the Crown duology after venturing off with Princess Maria Victoria, Aylwin Mirrodin, Ronan Astor, Isabel of Orleans, and Leopold throughout the self-titled debut. What did you find most enchanting about escaping off into these royal lands and then returning again as Marie becomes Marie Victoria Grace, Eleanor Aquitaine, Princess Dauphine of the Franco-British Empire, Wolfgang Friedrich Joachim von Hohenzollern, and more in the sequel to Lily and the Cross?
The Ring and the Crown is an alternate history of Europe. And one of the things that was inspired by it was what if um what if the English had won a certain battle? There was a certain pivotal battle. I'm sorry, I wrote this book, I think 13 years ago, so I don't even remember anymore. But there was a certain battle that if the English had won, they would have conquered France. So it said, what if England and France was one whole country? And then what if there was magic? And what if Merlin was real? And what if America was never became independent, but was always a colony. So it's kind of an alternate history with magic and Merlin and Arthurian legends. So it's really fun. It's one of my favorite books that I've written.
Hamilton fans will love this fictionalized and delightfully charming novel BuzzFeed predicted of your Alex and Eliza series, where the School Library Journal admired that with the popularity of the musical Hamilton still going strong, De La Cruz is struck while the iron's hot and shone a light on the extraordinary wife of founding father Alex Hamilton, Eliza Schuyler, where she puts that knowledge to good use and imbues her fictional version with a strong-willed and charming personality that'll instantly have readers cheering for her. What did you find most fascinating about recreating this romance over the best-selling trilogy of Alex and Eliza, Love and War and All for One against this historical setting?
There's letters that he wrote that are readily available. What was harder was to find stuff from her. How did she feel about all this? So I found some biographies of her, and some things that were written during that time about her. Yeah, and it came from my daughter wanting to know what was real in Hamilton. She said, what is real in that musical? Was that really the true story? And I said, oh, let me look it up. So I started doing some research and I told her, oh yeah, no, Angelica was already married, and there's no way he ever had an affair with her sister. Like they loved each other, there's no way Angelica would do that to Eliza. And so I had my whole different take on it. And they came from a very big family. They actually, I mean, there were sons. She had brothers. There was an heir, So I mean, but when you're writing fiction, when you're writing plays, you write things to make the story work. People always ask me, how do you decide what to keep historically and what to use for the story? And I said, well, I try to respect the real story, but I'm not a historian. I'm writing fiction. It's inspired by history, but it's not history.
With the Ring and the Crown, how would that have applied?
So The Ring and the Crown is an alternate history of Europe. And one of the things that was inspired by it was what if what if the English had won a certain battle? There was a certain pivotal battle. I'm sorry, I wrote this book, I think 13 years ago, so I don't even remember anymore. But there was a certain battle that if the English had won, they would have conquered France. So it said, what if England and France was one whole country? And then what if there was magic? And what if Merlin was real? And what if America was never became independent, but was always a colony. So it's kind of an alternate history with magic and Merlin and Arthurian legends. So it's really fun. It's one of my favorite books that I've written.
Please give viewers a little bit of a glimpse, if you would, into how you plot out a duology. Say like the one contained within 29 Dates and 29 Boyfriends.
29 Dates is a contemporary, and it was actually inspired by my sister-in-law who immigrated to America from Korea on her own as a teenager. And I thought, oh my God, how hard that would be. But it's also part of two of my best friends are Korean Americans, and one of them in college was always being set up by her mom, on these dates. They're kind of these yeah, kind of professional matchmaker kind of situations where you get introduced to people from the right families in who are Korean American in America. So I just thought that was so fascinating, and I wanted to do that and explore that. So it's a little fictional because it happens in high school. And so she goes on these 29 dates that her parents from Korea, trying to get her to meet the right people in America, but then, and then she meets one and it turns out he was like date number 2 or something, and she had rejected him because her parents liked him, but it turned out he's the guy for her. So it's really sweet, really cute rom-com.
Melissa de la Cruz knows exactly how to make fairy tale retelling shine. Bookless has affirmed, admiring the way that you put that process into action through your own original spin in the Never After duology over the 13th Fairy and the Stolen Slippers. We'd love if you talk about your approach to writing those back to back, and then similarly within The Queen's Assassin, over the self-titled The Queen's Assassin and The Queen's Secret.
So after I wrote Descendants, I realized that I still had stuff in the fairy tale realm that I wanted to do, and maybe not in the Disney universe. So that actually was inspired by an idea. When I remember it now, it seems so funny because it's so far from what the book came. There was a photo in a tabloid of the actors who played Jon Snow and oh my God, I can't remember her name anymore. The wildling that, from the Game of Thrones uh series. And in the TV show and in the book, she dies. And there was a photo in the tabloid of the actors getting married. And I thought, oh my goodness, Jon Snow got married to Ygritte, and so I thought, what if there was an alternate universe where, these bad things that happened in the story actually have, better endings. So that kind of got me thinking. And then I thought, oh, what if I do that with fairy tales, and also kind of the Harry Potter mania, these kind of midnight release parties. So basically, in Never After, Philomena, who's a fan of this fantasy fairy tale series, discovers that they're all real and they need help. So she journeys to Never After to help them. I actually think writing fantasy is the worst because you have to build the entire world from scratch and the magic rules. And every time I do it, I tell my assistant, remind me that this is so hard and I never want to do it again. But I'm really drawn to those books. Those are my favorite books. So they're hardest to write. Again, for all of that, because you got to make sure, that you have all your magic systems in place and they actually make sense and you're not like contradicting your own rules that you made up. And the history of it. I remember with Queen's Assassin, there was a early scene where there's a jaguar in the forest. And she said, is this based on fake Europe? Because in Europe, there's no jaguars. So that would have to be fake South America. And I said, it's made up. In my world, there's jaguars. So, and that was it, Stet.
How visual does it tend to become for you when you're creating scenes on the page?
You definitely see it in your head. So you try to, get it on a page, what you're visualizing. big cinematic moments, or, just, even just the details of what's in the room or what's the world like. So, yeah, I mean, you can kind of see it. So basically, it's like a movie playing in your head that you're trying to get on the page.
USA Today would muse amid all of your other creative goings on that you and husband Michael Johnston had gotten quite good at collaborating. The married couple are co authors of Frozen, which would kick off the Heart of the Dread series, and where 17 magazine promised that the mix of adventure and fantasy will have you addicted. What got you two as co authors equally as hooked as you continued writing successful sequels throughout Stolen and Golden?
Comes from a medieval poem, like the Dragon's Heart of Dread. So it's a dragon series. Um, Yeah, my husband and I actually write all our books together, at least all the fantasy books together. He didn't write Dallas Eye with me, but he's written Blue Bloods with me. We wrote Descendants together. We wrote Rings of Faith together. Melissa Del's Cruz is a brand. And it is my name, but it's also a brand. And with Heart of Dread, we were like, oh, let's put Mike's name on it too. But I think it works better with just one name on the cover, and he's married to me, so and he also does his own books. He has written several fantasy books and kids books under his own banner, and I help him with that, and my name's not on it either. So yeah, so it was kind of an idea that we both cooked up. We'd been really interested in doing a dragon fantasy and doing kind of a military fantasy. So it's a little bit like Aliens. It's kind of like Aliens 2 meets dragons.
When you were working on Joe and Laurie and A Secret Princess, did you have as much fun writing with Melissa Stoll?
Yeah, and Margie and I, we both loved Little Women, and she is, she has a master's in, 19th century American lit, which is where Little Women was. So she knew so much about Little Women, and I said I always wanted to write, a revisionist Little Women where Joe ends up with Laurie, because, as kids who read it, the fact that he doesn't end up with her is like the worst thing that can happen. Even though I like the latest version with Greta Gerwig, she sold me Amy, so I'm okay with that. But with the fan of the book, I just felt like it was so wrong, and so we said, why don't we rewrite it and have them end up together? That would be so great. And so yeah, so we had a lot of fun. We're best friends, so it was really easy. We trusted each other. We just sent the book back and forth to each other, and her daughter, who was even smarter than the two of us, did a lot of the research of, kind of like what they wore, what they ate, so May did a whole pass on it to make sure all our details were correct. So that was also really fun to get to work with one of our kids.
NBC News stopped to marvel at one point in your dizzying career that the author's been writing YA novels for years. When you look back over creating standalone titles amid all of these series throughout How to Become Famous in 2 Weeks or Less, The Fashionista Files, Adventures in 4-Inch Heels and Faux Pas, Fresh Off the Boat, Angels of Sunset Boulevard, Girls Stay in the Picture, Surviving High School, Something in Between, Pride and Prejudice and Mistletoe, Something to Love. Any one of these or other bestsellers we still got to talk about.
Before we had our kid, we were both night owls, and I always liked working at night because it's really quiet. You don't get anything pinging. You're not like, I mean, half my career was without social media, so there really were no distractions the first half of my career. And then, social media came on, and that's very distracting. But having a baby, it was hard to write at night because the baby wants you awake in the morning. And so I kind of had to shift the way I worked. So now I kind of keep banker's hours. I work from 9 to 5 pretty regularly. Usually, as an artist, I really did not like to keep banker's hours. I wanted to work when I wanted to, and I could work through the night, from 5 p.m. to 2 a.m. But yeah, I had to stop doing that. So now I get up, at 7, get our daughter out the door. She's a senior, so almost done with that. So it'll be interesting when she goes to college, whether we go back to being night owls or if we keep, kind of these bankers hours. Probably not so bankery, probably get to sleep in a little bit more, but yeah. Yeah, just try to do it every day, and like a regular job. I mean, I've been a full-time writer since 1999, so yeah.
When you next sat down to write the 5 stages according Dallas A. Ramos, when did you first conjure up the Filipino courtship ritual the Kirkus reviews highlighted as a uniquely interesting plot device in this sweet rom-com?
My mom picked up the book, and it is a romance about a Filipino girl and an American boy. And she said, "Oh, Dalisay," and I was like, "Oh wait, I've been saying it wrong." So it is the 5 stages according Dalisay Ramos. So that was inspired by a little bit of my parents' romance. There's a bunch of traditions in Filipino culture that people do when they got married. My dad serenaded my mom, which I thought with the Glee Club, outside their window, which I thought was so fun. And then I did a little bit more research and found out, kind of traditionally there are these steps that people do, which I actually kind of remember because I grew up in the Philippines since I was 13. You know, it's like the teasing of friends, where the friends kind of talk about, oh, you guys like each other. So they kind of, are a little bit of messengers and a little bit of, people are kind of prodding a couple to date. And then, the boy kind of does like all these, presents all these gifts and services to the family, so services, gifts, teasing of friends. Can't remember the other two anymore, but I wrote that book a couple of years ago. But yeah, so it is about, an American boy who falls in love with a Filipino girl who just moved to the States, and it's very traditional. And so it's not, not part of, kind of like I guess American culture a little bit. So it's a little bit of a culture clash.
As a storyteller, what gives you the greatest satisfaction of bringing different cultures to the fore as stars of your novels?
I enjoy, I guess, telling lots of different stories and telling stories that, I didn't grow up reading. I don't think I ever saw a Filipino protagonist when I was growing up. I can count them on my hand. There was a Jessica Hagerdorn who won the National Book Award for a novel called Dog Eaters, which was set in Manila. And then I think the oh God, what's his name? He's like escaping me now. Tom, the guy who wrote Even Cowgirls Get the Blues. He was one of my favorite authors. And he had a Filipino character in one of his books, but you don't really see that. You don't really see our culture represented as much. And we're actually one of the biggest immigrant groups in the United States. So I do enjoy bringing part of, my culture to my writing.
It's probably a lot more fun outside of the me bubble to see a set of characters like Hollywood stars Miranda Montana, Jermaine St. Germain Chang, and Cicely Bell fall after thinking they'd shine together forever. What redemptive promise did you see for these three when they meet up a decade later and reunite when stars align?
When Stars Align, which was inspired by a photograph of Paris Hilton, Lindsay Lohan, and Britney Spears from the early 2000s when they were all three kind of rising starlets, and the culture was so obsessed with them, and they were also all friends. And I just thought that is so cool. And the other inspiration actually came from my daughter, who's 18, and she said to me, Paris Hilton is a queen. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's so interesting. It's so different from how these girls were, kind of treated and perceived, when in the 2000s, and now we know how, terrible the culture was to them. So it kind of made me think, about what she said, and then also about, that photograph. And I thought, what if I wrote a story about these girls and their friendship and being, kind of like young and famous, but and having kind of secrets and betrayals, but then also being 40, because seeing them now, and kind of a redemption arc, I thought that was kind of nice. So, and I thought that would be kind of interesting to write about. I kind of work on everything with a big outline, so I kind of knew, where they would end up, and then I kind of work backwards. So, in a way, like my process is like kind of all over the place. So I kind of start with the ending, and then I start with a synopsis basically that I pitch to my editor, and then I fill in kind of a 3-act structure. But yeah, this ended up being kind of written, when they were younger, and then we kind of see them every 10 years, and then with a big climax at the end of, everything kind of being revealed and all their friendships either breaking down or reaffirming. Being in Hollywood, a little bit and seeing, even how executives talk about stars, and sometimes I'm kind of shocked, these kids are young, but they are in the industry and they're talked about almost like they're adults and gossip about like they're adults. And and I'm a parent, and I think at first I was just a little shocked by that, so I do feel like maybe there is a little bit of revenge there. Worry about the industry more than, young kids.
Romantasy just feels like the hottest genre on bookshelves lately. What can your fans in that spirit look forward to within Rings of Fate?
Rings of Fate is my first adult romantasy, and it is, we're calling it, my publisher is calling it a Princess Bride meets Wheel of Time. But really, I had pitched this as a sexy Lord of the Rings. And I think, kind of the banter, it's about a barmaid, a snarky barmaid who feels like nobody ever sees her for what she's worth. Everybody just kind of sees her as somebody in the background and somebody you can depend on, but, not like maybe like a romantic heroine. And then a prince with a terrible secret. And they're both kind of these flawed, very kind of sad, not sad, but, they're kind of spunky, but, very flawed human beings who, in the journey together to try to help the prince with his terrible fate, fall in love. And I think I can say that without giving it away. Ditan and Aaron. I do assign them early on for sure. Ditan was a name that my husband and I had been kicking around as like a hero in one of our books, and I was like, oh, I'm going to name the guy in this book Ditan. He was like, oh, okay. So it's just one of those things that we always talk about, like, oh, I kind of like how it looks on the page. It's kind of doesn't reference any culture or language. We just kind of made it up, but it sounds cool. And then Aaron, I kind of like how George R. Martin kind of uses kind of common names with different spellings. So it kind of feels, kind of fantasy. So I thought, oh, I want to call her, Aaron, but spell it, with an A.
Now, you first traveled with readers to Octagon Valley within the super secret Octagon Valley Society. What can they look forward to upon returning to that world when they take off with you on the super secret mission to the center of the moon pie?
In the super secret Mission to the Moon Pie, which is the second book in my Octagon Valley series. It's a middle grade book about a bunch of kids who are the smartest kids in the world. They take this test in the first book and they discover, that they have like IQs off the charts. And a little bit of a spoiler, they discover they're not even from this world. They're from a world that has been destroyed. And in the super secret mission to the moon pie, they find out the moon is made of cheese. Actually, no, it's made of moon pie. So it's kind of this wacky adventure that's a little bit like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory meets Google. What if Willy Wonka ran Google, basically? So there's a Onosander Octagon, who's kind of the genius who brings them all together. And on the moon, they save the world, they save the moon. Then they try to go back to their own planet. So find out what happens in the third book, especially since I write romantasy for teens and for adults now with Rings of Fate. Writing for teens, I think it is all about that first, that first blush of romance, that first experience. Everything is so exciting and new, and it's kind of about, figuring out who you are, as well as, falling in love. Whereas with adults, I think, there's a little bit more of a jaded air, a little bit more exhaustion in there, and a little bit of like, oh, the world sucks. This is, but now I have to figure out how to be in the world. Whereas for teens, I think I write maybe in a more idealistic tone. The world is fresh and new. They're not jaded. They're they're still, kind of open and excited about things. So I think that's very, that's something that I try to imbue in those books.
You sound as busy as ever. In that spirit, what can fans look forward to next coming up on your creative horizon?
My husband and I are writing a graphic novel for Slumu. Slumu is a slime playground that has spaces in New York, LA, Texas. Where else are we? We're in 5 places and we're expanding into a media empire. So we're starting with the graphic novel. We're introducing our characters, our origin story. So it's kind of the work that we did on Descendants, kind of creating an origin story for these characters. And Slumu was founded by one of my best friends. I've known Karen Rabinovitz for, almost 30 years. And so she asked me to be part of it. And yeah, so we're really excited. That comes out next spring.
Finally, as an author who's widely incredibly credited as helping to break down barriers, what basic ABCs of writing have you stuck to loyally throughout your career that you'd recommend to any other aspiring writer looking to earn their own place on bookshop shelves?
I think that, never give up. It's always been difficult. I mean, people are saying, oh, it's so hard to be a writer now. It was hard back then too, and I think the advice that I got when I was younger, because when I was starting out in New York, the most expensive city in the world and trying to be a writer, my friend Jonathan Ames, who was a fellow writer at New York Press, said, I was making $8,000 a year and I thought I could live on that, and I thought, okay, all right, if that's what it takes, I'm gonna try. I think you're gonna have to be okay with being poor. What do you want? Do you want to be a writer or do you want to be rich? I went into it actually not thinking I would ever make any money from it and being okay with not making any money up from it. Just, hopefully enough to live. I would say probably the best thing you could do is live somewhere that's not so expensive. If I could go back to when I was first starting out, I would have left New York and moved somewhere, after I'd made my contacts, after I'd sold my first novel, I would have moved somewhere cheaper. But yeah, I would say never give up. The world always wants new voices and new stories. I actually think it's a terrible time now when it feels like, they're not publishing anything new. They're not making new movies. There's nothing moving the culture, and why are we at such a standstill, because people don't want to invest, in creative people. And I just feel like, in a way, we're the most important people in the world because we don't really care about money. I mean, we care about stories. And so I guess that's my advice is to keep writing, don't give up, live somewhere cheap.
Melissa, it's been entertaining talking today. Thank you so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
You too. Bye-bye.